Okay, so we are back with Spice Wars.
Yeah,
Now
so
in your cinema.
I
Watch the story of Paul, how he becomes the messiah of the oppressed,
is that how they introduce?
defending himself against the evil house of the Harkonnen. The Atreides have to show grace and mercy. Spice Wars, now in your cinema. I have to train a little bit more my cinema voice, I
No,
admit.
no, no, that's
So,
well,
like,
is that how they introduce the
no,
video
that's
game?
how I would introduce
Oh,
it. I
okay,
have to
okay.
work a little bit on it. It was just spontaneous.
Yeah, 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 yeah. It's all good. It's all good. Again, I was just saying I hadn't seen the graphic for um for the uh for the video game. So it's interesting. Like it's almost
Is it the video game? I don't know.
no, I think it must be.
It
Is
looked
it?
like right there.
Yeah, well, because in the books it describes that space being a bit different, and or spaces on the planet a little bit differently.
Mm. So
But yeah,
let,
sorry.
let me ask you. So we want to talk a little bit more in depth about
Mm,
Dune, but not in terms of maybe the characters and all the details, but more
mm.
in terms of its significance. And I think you
Or
do that very well so
how,
far.
thank
Yeah.
you, how it deals with ideas. Well, I was just talking between the break and saying that when the Villeneuve movie was about to come out, I was getting lots of suggestions from YouTubers talking about Dune. Um, and some of them were really fascinating. Some of them resonated with me less, right?
Hmm.
Because some were just like Wikipedia, readouts, and then others went into much more detail. Um, and I enjoyed the novels, but I wouldn't consider myself an obsessive fan at all because I knew people who in high school where their email address was Quizatch Haderach
Yeah.
69 or some bullshit like
No, for
that.
me too. For me too. When I was in high school,
Right, yeah,
I had Dune references all over the place.
yeah. So like there were lots of people who were really, really into it. And for me, um it was fun to play with. Like the
Yeah,
ideas,
that's.
reading it, it was really interesting
I mean, you
because
said to me before that it was difficult for you to personally really identify with the book.
yeah,
Um,
well,
so my
mhm,
identification was more in the sense that it was this other world,
mhm.
which basically showed me a feudal society that displayed values of honor. Very
Right,
simple.
right. Well,
Yeah.
and I was really shocked watching The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. He talked about reading Dune as a teenager,
Mm.
and I think this was before an interview with Timothy Chalamet or something like that. Um, and he was talking about how much he identified with this, you know, brave, revolutionary, messianic character who is dealing with, a dead family and and
Very good point.
yeah,
Keep
yeah.
that in mind for a
Hmm.
second because I want to once more just like clarify the story a little bit uh, because we haven't done that yet, and
Oh, yeah,
then
yeah, yeah,
you
please.
bring your point.
Yeah.
So we have Paul Atreides.
Hmm.
He's the son of this gentleman with the amazing beard here, which makes
Yes.
me really envy it. Yeah, I think it's a story about
It's
another beard.
yeah, like there's some lumbersexual vibes going on, like really intense lumbersexual vibes.
That's a good one, yeah.
Um,
It's he has honor, and he
yeah.
takes the request of the emperor to take over the planet Arrakis. He should
Hmm.
take it over from the Harkonnens, who is a very brutal culture, a culture
Yeah.
that is more based like the Klingons, maybe on war or something,
Or kind of almost fascist or
fascist society,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. The
So and
fascist boogeyman. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it's the evil guy that is clearly at that moment identified as the evil man,
All in
right?
black leather all
Yeah,
the time.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
well, I always had my friends in my childhood who always liked something like that, and I was always like, how can you be for the Harkonnens? It didn't go into my mind, because I had this good evil distinction, and
Hmm.
how can you support evil?
Maybe like early contrarianism. I don't know. I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
Right? Or liking something
Maybe they saw something
a
more.
dark aesthetic.
Yeah, or
So, have you heard of the term dark academia? I had never heard of it. And then there was like a playlist of music on YouTube, and it was called like Dark Academia something. And I watched it or was listening to it, and it was like mostly classical, and it was enjoyable. But then I had to Google it, and apparently that's like a defined aesthetic subgenre, and I had no idea. Right, so maybe the friends who were liking the Harkonnens in their youth, they were just wanting a goth phase, but not wanting like a North American
By the way, I
goth phase.
was a goth when I was
Really?
younger. Yeah, well, I
Really?
was not really goth. I was on a single platform for goths in Germany, right?
Okay.
And I met really interesting people there,
Mm-hmm.
women and men.
Mm-hmm.
And my key was always because I studied old languages,
Okay.
so I
Yeah.
also studied Gothic. So my
Mm.
key sentence there was always, "I'm so goth, I speak Gothic."
Right. Sorry. I
Beat that, beat that.
no, no, I'm trying to imagine that because I've never been to Germany, and
Yeah. You know, that's actually a cultural event once a year in Leipzig.
mhm.
The Goths of the world unify in that city, and the city will be
Really?
filled with black people, black clothes, not black clothed people on the
Right,
streets. Yeah.
right, Goths in
Mm.
okay. Well, sorry, again, different background. There was an art exhibit in my hometown, and I can't remember the name of the artist, but he focused with Polaroids,
Mhm.
and the artist was gay and took hundreds upon hundred, probably thousands of Polaroids of skinheads because he had a thing for skinheads. And so, like, one of the exhibits, or a large chunk of the
Yeah,
exhibit, was just Polaroids that he had taken of different art models because he would do these collages, these very hypermasculine collages that were incredibly, very overtly homoerotic,
hmm,
based off of these Polaroids, usually of skinheads, sometimes guys in military gear. But apparently he'd spent time in Germany in the 80s paying skinheads to like pose, semi-nude for him.
great topic.
Yeah, yeah. So I just
You know,
that's the limit of my exposure to
yeah,
like German
but
goth
see, so
culture in
I
the
mean,
80s.
I distracted it now from
Sorry,
the
sorry.
movie, but it's a good point. But see, like this distinction in good and evil, like so you have
Mhm.
the idea of goth people building a counterculture
Right, yeah.
to something that is maybe overtly Christian or follows double standards of Christianity still without
Right.
being religious.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Or certain doublethink within Christianity or
Yes.
hypocrisy within Christianity.
But
Yeah.
then you meet people from these groups and you realize there is a social reason for why they exist.
Hmm.
And these goths, I'm not talking about skinheads, they
Yeah,
have
yeah.
social values that sometimes supersede what you find in superficial culture.
Can you tell me which values you're thinking? Like, I mean, maybe not
You just
just.
expect them to be evil, but
Mm-hmm.
they're friendly.
Right. Oh,
But
yeah,
okay,
yeah,
that
yeah, yeah,
it
yeah.
was a little bit of a joke, but
No, no, but I
no,
mean,
they're against war, for example,
yeah,
very
yeah,
peaceful.
pacifists.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they are like even though they're sometimes claiming to be Satanists, that's just it's a
Pretext to avoid conversation with people.
something like that. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
and then see, having grown up in East Germany,
Hmm.
like I mean, there, for example, a friend of mine, he was almost killed by a Nazi, right?
Oh, okay. Mm.
And there was a lot of like youth gangs who were beating up each other at
Really?
demonstrations and so on. Yeah, like I feel like when Americans talk about like these revolutions they have, for me it's always a bit childish because I grew up like in a center where people were really beating up each other, where you had
Mm.
like kind of street gangs, right? It wasn't
Yeah.
really that bad, but there was in the 90s, early 90s, there was a lot of violence on the streets. But the interesting
Hmm.
thing is that he got a knife stuck into his chest, and the knife got stuck there in the
Hmm.
bone.
Oh, okay.
So he
Yeah.
could be dead, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But the knife got stuck. He pulled it out, right? And they got friends later on. Like he was like left wing, like wearing all this left
Yeah,
wing
yeah.
stuff. The other was a Nazi, insulted him,
Hmm.
and like young people fighting with each other.
Yeah.
And on top you have this ideology that somehow guides you, that is somehow produced by you, and that somehow creates oppositions.
Yeah.
So you see, we come to Dune in a second,
Right. Yeah.
And then just one more thought. But then the interesting thing, you saw skinheads at one moment turning into left-wing people, and left-wing people suddenly at some point turning into right-wing people. And for example, for skinheads, it was always important with what kind of laces they were wearing.
Right. The
Were they
colors
white
having
or
some
red?
sort.
So
Oh, okay. So, and this is really fascinating for me because the Goths in my high school, that was an aesthetic choice or
yeah,
connected to music, or that there is an interesting counterculture not because of any ideological grounding, more like a vague sense of dissatisfaction, which is sort of like post 1970s, 1980s American punk culture, the punk music culture. But there wasn't, like when you mentioned the laces, there were a couple of like zine archives that I'd looked at, looking more at Britain in the 80s, Britain in some parts of the States, discussing like different distinctions among these groups and how there was a very clear connection to ideology and sense of identity. And this was also, still during the Cold War. And so for me, I thought that was really fascinating that there would be that level of deliberation and literacy with that, because I don't want to say that I grew up in an ideological vacuum, because I didn't. But when high schoolers were arguing about aesthetics or very superficial movies instead of ideas about values, about how society could be, right? It felt like there was an ideological vacuum, right? Even though that was just, an expression of what some people might call late capitalism, right? Where we're just taking the ideological background for granted. But that happened in Dune, where there'd be different characters. This isn't the connection you wanted, probably, but different characters.
Yes, I want that.
Well, different characters who were revolutionaries, and others who either had very ossified views of the world, or others who viewed society in terms of deliberate planning and social dynamics that were being manipulated, and some of whom were open to questioning the absoluteness of the structures that they could manipulate, and others who took the methods or means of those manipulations as rigid and absolute. And obviously this will have this impact on these people.
Yeah. And then also my question is, who manipulates?
In Dune, everyone is trying to, right?
Everyone manipulates and is manipulated by its own manipulation.
Well, or by being part of certain societies that they are subject to, right? So, I mean, you'd mentioned, and this is present in both the movie, the Villeneuve movie, and the book, the Leto character, the father with the amazing beard, being a tragic character because he's caught within his society's expectations of
code of honor,
what he's duty bound to do, and that doesn't lead to his betrayal, but it leaves him helpless in the situation where he's being betrayed.
1 second, because I have written down something he says when he gets the information from the emperor.
Oh, the emperor.
That he should take over Dune. One second.
Yeah.
So I came back with my old-fashioned Dune notes, and surprise, surprise, I haven't written it down.
We all do that. I think we wrote something down.
Yeah, he said, I wrote something down, but I just wrote something down about the scene itself, right? Oh no, actually I wrote it down.
Oh, okay.
There's no call, we do not answer.
Right. I don't remember if that was in the book.
Yeah, but I found it very, found it very well how it characterized the whole society of the Atreides in one sentence. That they have this strong view of honor.
tying into that idea of a feudal society
Mm-hmm.
that's, or
Mm-hmm.
like a almost anachronistic feudal society.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I think nowadays, if you look from a sociological perspective, the code of honor is replaced by different social institutions. Yeah. So, for example,
Yeah.
men are not so sensitive anymore when I call you out for a duel because you have talked with my beloved,
Right, 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 right.
my heart, my love interest,
Yeah,
and then either me or you, we shoot each other, right?
right, right.
So that's gone in the past. We don't have these incredible sensitivities in us anymore that are linked to an honor.
Well, we have new sensitivities
Hmm.
linked to new identities, but
That's
that's,
true, yeah.
yeah,
But
yeah.
I would say with that we come to a more democratic, egalitarian level.
Yes, because
Mm.
they're usually self-identified.
Hmm.
Not
Hmm.
always, but usually, yeah.
Hmm.
Or more likely to be self-identified rather than imposed externally or,
Hmm.
yeah,
So
by
yeah,
construct.
let's just go back to the story,
Yeah,
which I
yeah, yeah,
actually
yeah.
wanted to say.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So very simple story. They take over Dune, and then they
Mhm.
get into a an ambush, a political ambush, I would say.
Yeah, it was a setup. They were
It
betrayed.
was a setup, right?
Yeah, yeah.
See, that's what I didn't understand. So why does the Emperor pull the Harkonnens away from the Dune planet, and then he gives advice to the Harkonnens, as I understood it, to take over the planet again?
So this was explained more in the novel.
Hmm.
And I don't remember how much the Lynch version alluded to it. I don't think it did.
It didn't.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
And then with the
Because I had the movies, I watched both of the
yeah, yeah,
movies next to each other.
yeah. And you
The
didn't see
Lynch
that.
movie. And
Okay.
they were actually pretty synchronized up to
Hmm.
the moment where Paul meets the Atreides.
Right,
Sorry, Paul meets the Fremen.
right.
Yeah.
Okay. It might have been stated more explicitly in the Sci-Fi Channel miniseries, but in the books, and I think Villeneuve alluded to it fairly well.
Oh, okay.
But it was, again, he was very short with exposition because the
Hmm.
Sci-Fi Channel, I think, overdid the exposition. So to keep the flow of the movie going, the exposition was quite limited. Um, the Emperor was afraid of House Atreides, and couldn't openly attack House Atreides,
Mm.
but could work with House Harkonnen to allow House Harkonnen to attack the Atreides when they were vulnerable.
See, that's what I also wanted because they said that House Harkonnen has become the richest house in the
Hmm.
universe,
Yeah.
and then the Emperor gives the order that they should retreat, and they just say,
Mhm.
"Okay, we retreat."
Well, and I think something to do with the feudal society
Hmm.
and different types of obligation and coercion,
Hmm.
right? Because I
Hmm.
think it was alluded to that there was coercion behind imperial decrees, rather than a sense of allegiance necessarily.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, like the explanation in the book was that um, the Harkonnens knew that they weren't giving up the planet, and that they knew that it was an opportunity to kill off a long-standing rival.
Hmm.
And so they were acting in their own self-interest, but the Emperor was also acting in his own self-interest in a slightly different direction. Because he didn't necessarily want the Harkonnens to be more powerful,
Hmm.
but he didn't want the Atreides to continue to exist and potentially threaten the throne.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So, and then there is a further political player who I never understand. It seems it's a guild of women
Hmm.
who have somehow a religious function
Yeah.
because they say to the Harkonnen, or somehow they make clear that Paul, in this political ambush or setup,
Mhm.
that Paul and his mother should not be killed, and the
Yeah.
Harkonnen follow that.
Instruction or that
Yes.
that order. Um, so the role of that organization, I think
Hmm.
organization is perhaps the best term for it. Um, it gets described in an excruciating amount of detail. but at times, like, and again, I haven't counted every, comma in the books. I've read them a few times and enjoyed the ideas, but
Yeah,
felt
that's
very
fine. That's fine.
distanced from the characters. Um, and sometimes it felt like when they were describing this organization, the Bene Gesserit, that again, at times Herbert was very, very precise, and then at times he was a little bit vague about them. So it was an organization entirely of women that were involved in different political and social machinations throughout the
Mhm.
empire. And they had their own set of goals that they didn't share, and then um, engaged with the different great houses, almost like power brokers
Mhm.
for different interests. And at times they'd present themselves to the great houses just as being a finishing school for aspiring young women. But most of the characters within the great houses seemed to be aware that it was much more than that.
Mm.
Um,
They have this capability of in the Lynch movies, they called it the weirding voice.
yeah, okay, so one of the
Sounds
things
weird.
that I didn't like about the Lynch movies is Lynch took a number of creative um, departures from the book. Villeneuve didn't, which
Oh,
is one of the reasons I preferred that.
okay.
Um, but yeah, in all of them, there's reference to the voice, which was explained as a way to tap into the subconscious of the listener,
Okay.
I think, in a way, yeah.
Well, I
So it
think
wasn't magical, it was just, yeah,
yeah.
psychology
So we
somehow.
almost summarized the story now of the Villeneuve movie,
Hmm.
right? The Atreides get into the setup. The father gets killed through an
Hmm.
attack of the Harkonnen. The Harkonnen take over the planet again, and Paul Atreides and his mother get expelled into the desert, or
Yeah, yeah, presumably to die, and
yeah,
then
to
they
die.
meet the Fremen and take on a quasi-religious, not quasi-religious. Paul embodies their Messiah myth that was planted by the Bene Gesserit, which his mother is a member of the order of, which she disapproves of because there are going to be consequences for her and also to the order's plans later on.
Mm.
Um,
And we will
yeah,
talk about
and
Paul taking over the Messiah, the revolutionary character that you have
mhm.
pointed out with Colbert, how
Oh
he's
yeah, yeah, yeah,
fascinated
yeah.
of it and how you're critical of it. After a short break. So again, the whole is on the podcast, and when you're on the podcast, you can also watch it on YouTube. Otherwise, like it, like the
Mhm.
video, give us a like or a
Yes.
comment, and see you in a second.
Mhm.